Time seems to really run when you're focused on something you care about. It's like all you do is blink, and then the whole world goes and changes around you. And there's nothing you can really do about it either. That's just the way it is. Finally back to working on the E30. And talk about some newfound motivation. Finally having the PPF in my hands sure does make finishing prep seem more interesting. Plus, it's not like there's that much left anyways. In fact, I'd go so far as to say I'm almost back to the realm of stuff that I've done before. Bodywork was new, but bodywork is almost done. Then I get to jump back into the world of wrap, which is at least something I've done before. I can almost see the finish line now. Though before the wrap even gets close to the car, it'll need to be cleaned. Both from sitting and the delays of life, it got dusty the same. Given where the car's headed, probably best to finish that too. Nothing to it but to do it, and I'd wager sanding first makes more sense. I left this bumper off with a ton of Bondo on it. From where this car was hit, it was cracked. And the way I tried to fix it was by putting a little piece of mesh metal underneath the panel and then on top covering it with Bondo. I let that sit and now I'm basically just sanding it flat. As strange of an idea as that was, it actually worked pretty well. Not too bad for never having done it before. And while it dries, I figure giving the mirrors the same treatment the rest of the car had is a no-brainer. They need to be flat too, especially the parts that are peeling clear cut. And at this point, this process isn't anything new. I'm finally starting to feel comfortable with it. With that, this car is officially prepped. All the panels are likely the flattest they've ever been. So really, all that's stopping me from wrapping this car is a little bit of dust. Come to think of it, now that I'm starting to consider putting the wrap on the car, I'm also realizing that it's got a bit cold in here. Yeah, 51 degrees is way too cold to be installing this film. I think 55 is the minimum recommended temperature. Kinda weird. Feels like I just got this AC and now it's already time to look for a heater instead. The time of year where everything seems to die. Perfect time for a project, I guess. But the wrap's not going to get too far with it being this cold in here, so I should probably figure that out first. And with that, the garage officially has a little bit of heat. Pretty entry level as far as heaters go, but since the garage is fully insulated, it makes a way bigger difference than I thought it would. So as I let the building heat up, I finished cleaning the car with some IPA and the rags. This isn't going to get all the dust, and it's not a true wash of the car, but before every single panel the wrap goes on, the plan is to do an individual clean to make sure that there's no actual dust that the wrap's going on top of. That way we give the material the best chance to stick to the car and look as good as possible. What it really boils down to is lots and lots of wiping. Pretty surreal to see a big roll of the color I chose. Looks even better now. Number 8, Flip Thunder Green. Changes from a steely blue to a golden green. Absolutely gorgeous. And I think it'll suit the car perfectly. I think starting with the trunk lid makes the most sense on this car. It's a new material, and I don't think it'll be too different, but either way I think a flat and simple panel is a good place to start. It'll at least help me learn the material. Looks like some pre-installation info from Vivid, and the more I read, the more I realize what this information is. They're not suggesting I install this PPF like I did vinyl. They're suggesting I follow a wet installation approach. In other words, something completely new to me. Looks like time changes more than just the season. Wrap has changed too, and colored PPF differs from vinyl in more than just its molecular structure. And it's more akin to the tale of two bottles than anything, both of which will be filled with different liquids. We have a tack solution that makes it sticky, and a slip solution that does the exact opposite. The tack solution is simply diluted isopropyl alcohol. It cleans the surface and the back of the film, making it stick. The slip solution, on the other hand, is made with baby shampoo, and it's also diluted with water, roughly 2 to 4%. And the idea of using these is actually completely foreign to me. So it looks like what got me 2 wrapped cars before will not get me a third. Coming in from ground zero yet again. Still, I think it's a good idea to start with the trunk lid. And at least cutting the material should be the exact same as vinyl, so hopefully I don't have to relearn everything. I cleaned the surface with IPA and then I re-cleaned it with a tack cloth. At this point, there should be no dust on it, so I'm ready to actually put the film on the surface. And just like with vinyl, there's a plastic cover on the film itself, as well as a barrier on the back to stop the adhesive from sticking to itself. So I'll need to take both of those off, but that's nothing new. What is new is what comes next. This is a wet application, and based on the training videos I watched, what I'm supposed to do is spray the entire surface before removing the backing paper with the slip solution. In my head, this would make it not stick, but apparently that's what you want. So even if it feels like it wouldn't work, I'll happily give it a try. It's what they suggested after all. And if I know anything, it's that I'm not an expert in this. Just like when I first learned to vinyl wrap, my goal with this first panel is not really to make it perfect. I'm assuming I'm gonna make quite a few mistakes before I actually get a piece to look decent, so really what I care about more than anything right now is the actual process of learning how to do this. And from what I can tell, it goes kind of like this. Since there's liquid between this film and the car, I need to get it out. So that's where the squeegee comes in, pushing the liquid out of the sides so the material can actually stick to the surface. And so far, for this flat panel, this process is working very, very well. After finishing glossing out the top portion, I went around and started looking into the edges, only to realize that, for the life of me, they weren't sticking to the car. Turns out that slip solution might be a little more effective than I originally thought. In fact, it was way too effective. No matter how much I pressed the material into the surface and how much I washed it with the tack solution, the edges weren't really sticking to anything. Even heat didn't really change that, which is very different from the video I watched. But I'm definitely chalking this up to me not knowing what I'm doing. So the goal at the moment is to first see if I can salvage this piece, and if I can't, try it again. I guess I couldn't really call it learning if I did it right the first time. I was clearly doing something wrong. I had to be. It worked perfectly fine in the videos, so why wasn't it working when I was doing it? At that point, I really didn't know. But I was also still learning the material itself, and quickly finding out the limits. I noticed a patch on the back of the trunk was miscolored, and I initially thought it was just a stain from me rubbing up against it, but it turns out it was just part of the film, and I didn't know why. So I was left with the entire panel being loose at the edges, and a stain on the back from a mystery source. At least what did lay down properly with this first attempt looks absolutely stunning. I can see the promise, I just don't know how to get there yet. I made up my mind that this piece was going to have to come off either way. So what I tried to do was replicate all of the issues I'd run into up until now. I thought that if I understood what caused them, I could prevent them in the future. And the biggest issue to me at this point was the actual staining, which turned out to be a result of heating the material from the back and then stretching it. A little weird, but at least I know not to do that now. So hopefully I don't recreate that issue on the next attempt. At least the one thing I have going for me is since the material's not really sticking to the car, it'll be easy to take off. Which it was. But here's the kicker. It decided that it did want to stick in certain places. So the trunk is no longer flat. Removing the film pulled up a lot of paint with it. Sick. Very sick. This panel needs to be re-prepped. Later that night, I chatted with Vivid about what I was doing wrong and learned a couple things that I could change for my next attempt. Learning something new is often frustrating when it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so a little break like that was good for a number of reasons. Either way, today I wanted to try the front fender. I've got to resand the trunk and I'm waiting for Bondo to dry, but I should be able to get a good amount of practice in on this panel. And while I was originally planning on getting a couple panels done this weekend, it seems like at this point, my hope is to just get one decent one. Gotta temper my expectations, I guess. I learned that the start of my approach was correct. Clean the panel, get it dust-free with a tack cloth, and then use the slip solution underneath. The two mistakes I made were the edges and heating. The staining was that I just simply overheated and overstretched the material, but the edges was a misunderstanding of how they actually work. At least that's what I was told. Since I'm doing a wet application, if the material is wet, it's not going to actually really stick to the car. What's holding it in place now is not the actual adhesive, it's a vacuum effect. It's only really stuck to the car when it dries and when you squeegee out the water. So what I needed to do to get those edges to stick was to simply wait for them to dry. Unlike vinyl, which you can do all at one time because it's a dry application. This PPF, I was told, I need to be more patient with. So what they suggested was to actually do two panels at the same time. Do the flat sections that don't really need adhesive first, then move on to the other one doing the same thing, and then once the first one is dried, come back to it when the edges are actually able to stick again. Allegedly, that is the ticket to success. And since it's different than what I tried last night, I'm game to give it a try. It turns out that since the fender's pretty complicated from a body line standpoint, it ended up taking me long enough to do the middle section that the edges were dry to the touch. So I figured that I would give them a try, at least the ones that seemed sticky. The top edge up by the engine bay worked perfectly. It stuck exactly like vinyl did, and it didn't show any signs of lifting. I thought the same thing would happen for the door, so I went over and tried it, only to find out that it still was a little wet. At least I hope that's why it wasn't sticking. So rather than forcing it like I did last night, what I did was trim the material and move on to the other side. I'm also trying an inlay technique for where the trim goes, since that was a trouble area on the other side. All this really does is give the PPF a better surface to stick to. While I was doing this, I was also chatting with Vivid, and they suggested a different approach for this fender specifically. The first side I did, I focused on the concave portion first, the little valley between the top body line and the wheel arch. My thought going into it was I wanted the material to be at rest in that divot so that it wouldn't try and rise when it got warmer. They suggested for this fender I focus the flat panels instead. Then once the stick is back, worrying about the little divot. And once again, I understand that I'm not the expert here, so I'll happily try whatever the people who've done it before suggest. The issue with this approach, at least in my opinion, was that I had to stretch the material quite a bit, so I wound up in the same exact situation the other side is in, having a significant amount of the film properly stuck to the car, and the edges not wanting to stick whatsoever. At least, similar to the first night though, I still love the color, and I can see the promise of what this car could look like finished. I just don't know how to get there yet, and unfortunately, the advice of waiting didn't do a whole lot. I was told to wait overnight until the edges completely dry, and I did. However, when I walked outside to try this the following morning, I noticed that these edges were actually less sticky than they were the night before. Maybe it's the surface of the car, or maybe I overworked the film. All I know is that at this point, the edges on this passenger fender are not sticking to the car whatsoever. And at least right now, it doesn't seem like any amount of IPA is going to change that. I did work these edges quite a bit more than the other side though, so I'm hoping that's all it is. After all, I can kind of eliminate the surface itself from being the issue by sticking a piece of vinyl to it, so I'm thinking I'm still doing something wrong with the install. But on the bright side, at least this piece needed to come off anyways. It looks as if, when I was adjusting it earlier, it tore up a bit of clear coat, so there's a couple imperfections underneath, which is even more frustrating. At least hopefully I've got the other side going for me. So after a day of sitting, this should apparently be as sticky as can be. Only, it's not. Just like the other side, it's now not wanting to stick to the car whatsoever. And to make matters worse, while trying to stretch it, I tore a hole in it. So once again, I replaced this entire thing, and I'm right back where I was, waiting for the material to dry again so I can hopefully get it to stick to the car. It looks like this is going to be quite a bit harder than I originally expected, but at least to me, that's kind of what learning's all about. It's not like I knew how to do any of the bodywork before I did it, and I'm glad I tried it. So I know at the very least, I'll be happy I learned how to do this, even if it takes way longer than expected. Learning isn't always pretty, and it doesn't always happen overnight. I'll figure it out. Eventually. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can help support me and my content. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.